Hello, welcome back to my course, Worldview Studies. So let me share my PPT. Okay, let me repeat what we have done last time. And I have given you introduction to this worldview. Well, this is based on materialism, which Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels from Germany developed together. Excuse me. And I have also given you some background and representative websites here. And also naturalistic and materialistic worldviews, the background of this Marxism. And I also mentioned the representative nations, and still quite influential, even though uh, Soviet Union collapsed in 1990s. And then I try to explain the contents of Marxism, and first of all, manifesting atheism. This worldview argues that matter is the prime reality. So this is thoroughly materialism. Second, Marxism argues for materialism regarding the genuine external reality, the essence of the world surrounding us. So here there is no space for spirit or mind or soul and things like that. Third, to the question what the human being is, Marxism states that man's actions are the result of two kinds of materialistic reasons, namely the physical composition of each individual and the influence of the environment. So here, famous is the Pavlov's behavioral experiment. Number four, Marxism also emphasizes reason as the basis on which man can have knowledge. Five, as for ethics, Marxism asserts proletariat morality. Proletariat is the labor and working class. Number six, regarding the history of mankind, Marxism maintains a dialectical view of history called historical materialism. So I mentioned the Hegel's theory of thesis, antithesis, and synthesis. And Marx adopted it and applied it into his theory. So let me move on now, the representative Marxists. Of course, the first person to mention as Marxism's representative philosopher is obviously Karl Marx. As I mentioned before, he was born in Trier. So if you visit Trier, you can find the Karl Marx Museum. That's the house where he was born. And later on, he moved to Cologne, and along with the Engels from Wuppertal, they founded the first communist newspaper called Neue Rheinische Zeitung, the New Rhine newspaper. Later on, Marx moved to England, and there he officially began the communist movement by publishing the previously mentioned Communist Manifesto and Das Kapital and so on. Friedrich Engels is the second representative Marxist. He was born in Wuppertal in North Rhine-Westphalia, in Germany, of course, as the son of a Protestant operator or entrepreneur. The Industrial Revolution at that time increased the poor, and the workers felt a sense of problems when they saw that they were too poor. He met Karl Marx in Cologne, as I mentioned, and led the communist movement together, supporting him economically and financially. And Engels called Marxism a scientific socialism, a method and worldview of social analysis focused on social class relationships and social conflicts. Now, let me move on to the third thinker, that is Vladimir Lenin from Russia, as you know. He applied the worldview of Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels to his own country, Russia, and in 1917, he abolished the former monarchy, and through the Bolshevik Revolution, he founded the communist nation called the Soviet Union. However, in this process, about 20 million people were sacrificed, which is actually the most victims in history. And then came the Joseph Stalin. He became the successor after the death of Lenin. A Soviet Union turned into a world power, along with the United States. After the Second World War, Stalin spread Marxism to other nations, and Eastern Europe became communist countries, followed by China in 1949 and Cuba in 1959. So let me move on to mention the influence of Marxism. As China and Cuba became communist countries, Marxist worldview was spread to Africa, Southeast Asia, and countries such as Vietnam and Cambodia, North Korea, and even South America. However, when the Berlin Wall fell in November 1989, and the East and West Germany were reunified in October 1990, the Soviet Union collapsed when Gorbachev pushed a restructuring and openness policy, and then the East European Communist bloc was abolished like a domino as well. Nevertheless, Marxism is still very influencing the whole world. Especially the Marxist social analysis and methodologies influenced numerous political theories and social movements. Marxism entails the Marxist economics, Marxist sociology, Marx's political method and view of revolutionary socialism on the social changes. The economic system and social relations are called the base and superstructure. And Marxism states that as the forces of production, which is in most cases technological power, improve, the existing social organizations become inefficient and suppress progress, and these inefficiencies emerge as a social contradiction in the form of class struggles. And according to Marxist analysis, class struggles within capitalism arise due to the increasing contradiction between the production that was very much mechanized and socialized by the proletarians and surplus profits of the small number of bourgeois made by their private ownership and use of surplus products. As the contradiction becomes clear to the proletariat, the social conflict of the two hostile classes increases until the social revolution finally takes place. The result of this reform is the establishment of socialism. In other words, a socio-economic system based on the co-ownership of the means of production, distribution based on contributions, and production directly organized for use. Karl Marx predicted that as productivity and technology advance, socialism will eventually fall at the stage called communism. In other words, socialism is only an intermediate stage to reach communism. He viewed that in communism, classes and nations disappear, and a human society built upon the rule of from each according to his ability to each according to his needs and co-ownership. Well, then what would be the strong and weak points of Marxism? Let me mention the strong points of Marxism first. To begin with, Marxism seriously criticized the prevalent side effects of capitalism, especially the problem of the gap between the rich and the poor in the perspective of social justice. And furthermore, Marx tried to improve the poor working environment of laborers who are exploited in poverty. As the Industrial Revolution took place in England and mass production began, the so-called capitalistic society emerged. However, many problems broke out with the emerge of capitalism, especially the class gap and struggle between capitalists and laborers worsened. So capitalists try to maximize their profit by demanding more severe work while giving low payments to the laborers. However, laborers still had to work assiduously. As productivity improved, laborers produced more value, but the gap between the rich and poor increased. Furthermore, the unemployed had to endure a more impoverished life, and the Marxists view that this contradictory state will get worse and a revolution will eventually break out. Marxism seriously thought about the contradictory situation at that time and tried to offer a solution to this problem. The second strong point of Marxism is to help us to understand history in another perspective. The historical materialism of this worldview explains the social development process quite persuasively. Now, the primitive communist society has the lowest productivity since man produced using the primitive tools and performed production activities from nature. Here, the important principle is the co-ownership and equal distribution of products. However, this society disappears as private ownership, slavery, and the market economy emerge. The next is the ancient slave society. Productivity was a little bit improved due to the approval of private ownership of property. It was a third-class society in which the slaves produced and slave owners consumed. The third phase is the medieval feudal society. It is a society in which, whereas feudal laws owned the land and slaves, slaves develop and cultivate the region and present the harvest as a tax to those feudal laws. In this process, money started to be used in the market, and as large-scale factories started to form, commercial capitalists emerged. Fourth is the capitalist society. Ownership by social status was abolished, and capitalists and workers made contracts with each other for production. However, as the conflict between the two classes became greater, capitalist imperialism collapses. Eventually, a socialist society appears, and it is claimed that this society already had appeared in 1917 Russia. In such a society, the goal of production is for the human being. Everyone can work according to one's ability and consume according to one's contribution to society. So far, the strong points of Marxism, and let me move on to the weak points of this worldview. First of all, Marxism is a totally materialistic worldview, so it cannot account for the immaterial and spiritual aspects of life. Furthermore, it is impossible to explain everything about the human society only from the materialistic perspective. Marxism claims that the economic system of a society determines the legal, social, and political systems. The method of production is the foundation of society. So all the problems of society arise because there is a problem in the method of production. However, this is excessive reductionism. This is because social problems may have many different reasons. Number two, Marxism's historical materialism tries to explain history only as a history of class struggle. But this again is a very simplistic approach. This is because if we look at the progress of history, there are many other factors apart from this, such as natural sciences and the development of technology, which made a significant contribution to history. However, Marxism either neglects or ignores these aspects, and therefore it is necessary to have a more comprehensive view of history. In fact, Marx's prediction of the fate of capitalism was amiss in that although there was a crisis to the capitalist economy, revolution did not happen in any of the capitalist countries, but happened only in developing countries. In this sense, philosopher and historian Leszek Kolakowski claims that Marx's theory is incomplete and ambiguous in many ways, and he considers the laws of dialectics as fundamentally erroneous. Furthermore, Marx's philosophical dogmas cannot be proven by scientific means and are only nonsense. Therefore, some people claim that Marxism's historical materialism is just historical determinism, which suppresses individual rights in order to implement communism. Now, the third weak point is that finally, communist revolutions require too many victims when put to practice. For instance, during the Russia's Bolshevik Revolution, I mentioned already about 20 million people were sacrificed, which is more than the whole casualties of the World War II. And afterwards, from 1917 to 1987, about 64 million people became victims. When China turned to communism during the so-called Cultural Revolution of Mao Zedong, tens of millions of people died. Therefore, during the last 70 years or so, more than 100 million people died because of this communism. Can such sacrifices of lives be justified to achieve the communist revolution? Well, Georgy Weigel criticizes communism by saying that Marx taught that God was a projection of man's radical alienation from himself, from his labor, and from a human community cruelly divided by class barriers. Man's salvation, in Marx's view, thus lay within history, in the creation of a mundane utopia. Lenin, in turn, believed that the advent of this radically secular version of the coming kingdom could be dramatically accelerated by revolutionary action. That's a conviction by which he justified the homicidal cruelties of the secret police. Lenin hated the church and persecuted the church mercilessly, and the communist animus against religion, and especially Christianity, was no accident. It was an essential part of the Marxist-Leninist package. A communism that had a benign view of Christian worldview or biblical perspective was no more possible than a communism that had a benign view of democracy or of market economies. Furthermore, another philosopher of science, Karl Popper, criticized Marxism's historical materialism for being unconvincing because he believed that Marxism had been initially scientific. But when these predictions were not in fact borne out, Popper argues that the theory avoided falsification by the addition of ad hoc hypotheses that made it compatible with the facts. And Marx claimed that all the workers and farmers in the world would unite and rebel so that they would abolish capitalists and the landowners' oppression, and claimed the method of production and political power in order to create a worldwide dictatorship of the proletariat. However, this has never happened in history, but instead capitalist countries overcame the weaknesses of the capitalist economy and made various efforts to become more advanced than the communist countries. And then we'll move to alternatives to Marxism next time. So let me stop here and thank you for your attention. We will see you next time.